Okay, so we are live. Guys and girls, exciting. The subject that's very close to my heart, auctions. And in fact, what we're going to be talking about is a topic which is when auctions go wrong. When auctions go wrong. And you're not going to just hear from an auctioneer, you're going to hear from one of the great real estate lawyers in the country, Jared Zack, who I've got to say to you, he does. I'd be shocked, Jared. I'd be shocked if you didn't do more conveyancing than any other lawyer in the country. Would that be right? Would you guys do more conveyancing than any other country lawyer in Australia? Or I could be wrong there.
I think we could do well. We'd be up there. Yeah, certainly New South Wales, and probably Australia too.
Okay, so Jared is from Dott Crossitt, and a lot of the big clients in real estate use Jared. And we were having a chat the other day, and I said, mate, you know what I'd love to talk about? I'd love to talk about when auctions go wrong, and we can both get my view and Jared's view. They do go wrong. They do go wrong. And I've got to tell you, Jared, when a market changes, for some reason, even more issues come up, which, I just think people are more stressed. I think people have a bit of buyer's remorse when the market's not that hot. So issues come up. But so firstly, thank you for joining me, Jared.
No, thanks for having me, Tom.
Mate, I'm just curious, like on a Saturday or on a weeknight when they're doing in-room auctions, what is the most common call for help you get from auctions on the day of the auction? I'm just curious. Like, is there a common thread of the panic?
There's a couple
I call it the panic button call.
Yep. No, there's a couple that come up time and time again.
You've gone silent, Jared.
Sorry,
I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? No. Hello.
I still can't hear you.
Oh, what's going on? Can you hear me now?
Have you pressed the mute button?
I have not. Have I just gone silent all of a sudden, have I? Or
yeah, I can't hear you. I can't hear you, Jared.
You could hear me before,
so what I'd love you to do.
How is this? How's that? Any better?
It's so weird. What I'd love you to do. Oh, they can. Wow.
Is that up?
Hang on a second.
Is that better? How's that, Tom? Can you hear me? Hello? Now I can't hear you. How odd. Are you there?
Now, Jared, what about now?
How about? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Oh, fantastic. That's a relief.
Okay, so Jared, the panic, let's talk about the panic button call. The panic button call. On a Saturday or on a weeknight auction, if Cooley's doing a weeknight auction or what have you. Mate, tell me, what are the most common things?
Well, there's a lot that can go wrong. They're actually terrifying as a lawyer when you think about all the things that can go wrong for your clients at auction. The things that come up the most, however, it's sort of a scenario where the hammer's gone down, the registered buyer wanders over to the table to sign, and he says at the last minute, oh, can I put this in my company name? Or can I put this in my SMSF name or my wife's name? That one comes up time and time again. So the big problem with that is, and I can tell you the answer straight away, really, you should not be putting down any name on the contract other than the registered bidder, particularly with companies.
Hello, everyone. We are talking predominantly New South Wales here. We are predominantly. I mean, there are some things that go transcribe across most states. I
reckon this is one of them. You got to be, because whether a company validly exists and has the authority to enter into a contract for sale, that's a federal issue. So no matter what state and territory you're in. The issue is, if you rock up at the auctioneer's table and say, I want to put it in X, Y, and Z company name, Mr. Auctioneer and the agent, well, they don't even know if that company exists, right? And if it does exist, they don't know who the directors are, who's authorised to sign. They don't know whether it's solvent, whether it's in liquidation or receivership. And so it's a bit of a risk. You really shouldn't do it. You should just sort of say, look, I'm really sorry about this. You registered as Tom Panos, and that's the person we need to have your name down as. And I'll just give you a quick example, Tom. This is a bit of a horror story. There was an agent who's actually a very, very good agent, but he was quite friendly with the developer who won the auction. And the developer came up and said, oh, look, mate, I'm really sorry here, but can you put this in this company's name? And he knew better, this agent, but the guy was friendly. The market was down a bit. The developer had done him a favour by sort of winning the auction. And he said, oh, right, you don't have an ASIC extract? And he said, no. All right, okay. So he put down this company name. Saturday night, he couldn't sleep. He knew he'd done something wrong. Sunday evening, the agent couldn't sleep. He knew he'd done something wrong here. And Sunday night, he calls me. He says, man, I'm panicking. I need you to do an ASIC search when you come in Monday morning. I need you to look up this company. Tell me it exists. Tell me Tom Panos is the director, and tell me it's solvent. And so I get him first thing on Monday morning, and I call him up, and I've done the ASIC search. And I said, look, do you want the good news or the bad news? He goes, well, tell me the good news. He said, well, the company exists. Tom Panos is the director. It is solvent. Bad news, it didn't exist on Saturday.
Oh, wow.
So he's only set the company up on Monday because he wants to save a buck, right, as all developers do. So big problem there, because if he didn't exist at the time the contract was signed, we don't have a contract. So we had to fix that up, and he learned a lesson. It's a little lesson for everyone. You really shouldn't be departing from the bidders registry when it comes to putting the name on the contract.
Jared, you know what happens sometimes with me, and they buy the property at auction. They come over to the kitchen table to sign the contract, and they turn around and say, oh, I'm not quite sure, who the final name's going to be. I'm just going to put down my name or nominee. Now, I don't think that stands anymore, this nominee, does it?
It certainly doesn't stand as far as the Office of State Revenue are concerned. I think it probably does stand from a contractual perspective, but the Office of State Revenue will say that's two transactions. You've bought it, and then when you've put it in your nominee's name at the end, that's a second transaction that you've got to pay stamp duty. The bigger risk on that one is actually for the buyer. The Office of State Revenue, they're pretty broke at the moment. They're coming down on all these things now, trying to get more money from us.
Okay. Now, Jared, I want to talk to you about the scenario, where the husband buys a property at auction, and then he says, oh, no, I want my wife there as well. And the wife's not there, right?
Yeah.
And then you turn around and say, okay, well, you can actually sign just him up and put it in his name. Then he gets upset because he goes, no, it's got to be in both names. So is a potential solution to that, you put it in his name, you sign the contract, you don't put both names on the contract at that time, because if you do, you're going to get one signature short, and you just say, get her to come on over, and as soon as she's come on over, I will add her name to the contract, and then she'll sign.
Now, there's another option. I just said then how the nominee clauses are going to get double dutied. There is an exemption for husband and wife. So you can actually, you don't write the words nominee, but if you just put the husband's name on there, the solicitor can vary the transfer document just before settlement and put the wife on. So it's for close family members. Off the top of my head, I know it's children. It might even be, it is parents and children, husband and wife. So the OSR, this time I need to be. What's happened here?
I can hear you. I can hear you.
You there,
I
Tom?
can hear you.
You've just gone
Yeah,
out
I
a
can
little
hear
bit.
you.
So that is definitely New South Wales. I'm actually not familiar with whether there's a similar thing in Queensland and in other states and territories.
Okay. So Teresa here's put a question. Can you put on nominee? We're saying, look,
you can do it, but you're going to get double stamp duty.
You might have an issue with stamp duty, which is a big issue, by the way. Yeah. Now, can I move on to the next one? Next scenario. So bottom line here, Jared, mate, make sure that you train your buyers to say, listen, whoever's registered is going to be signing the contract, right?
Yeah. Correct.
As for what and so should you, if you're buying it as a company, should you be registering the company?
Correct, you should. And you should give the agent, or the agent should require an ASIC extract on the Friday afternoon or whenever it is. Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to dilemma number 2. The hammer falls. The underbidder makes a late bid, but says he made it before the hammer falls. What do you do? What do you do? And this, by the way, this happened to me in Roselle. This happened to me in Roselle about a year and a half ago. So Jared just picked. So I'll tell you the story. So there's a buyer on my right-hand side, and I've been mindful of this buyer because I did see a card. And the auction's going and going and going. And what happens, Jared, is that it goes over reserve, and I've had given this buyer, he's not made one bid once. And I've given him ample opportunity. And then I'm going to put the hammer down. And if you ever watch any of my auctions, Jared, I drag them out, like to the point where people turn around and that if they follow me, they sort of know, like when I say this, I'm not about to sell, but I've dragged it out. And then my hand has gone past the halfway mark. I've lost momentum, right? You know what I mean? It's on the way down. Yep. And it's going down. And as my hand hits the contract, so I normally do this, Jared. I normally have this, right?
Yep.
I roll up the contract. As it's going down, I go, and the hand goes up, but it was too late for me to pull it up, right? He then says, I bid. I bid. And I said to him, mate, hammer's gone down, right? And I shut it down very quickly. The owner was there and saw it all. The owner took my side of it. But Jared, so what's the legal perspective there?
Okay, it's scary how little rules there are around auctions. It's a 1,000-year-old economic tradition that has sort of evolved into this current age. As far as it's concerned in Australia, and I'm talking about all the states in here, the rules are honestly about 1 page long. There's very, very little. But one rule that is very clear is it is the auctioneer's final say. So he is the final arbiter. So in your case, you could sort of say, as long as you're acting in good faith, not doing something completely sort of fraudulent, as of course you wouldn't because you're the vendor's agent, your final say is what goes. And that's in the regulation.
Okay, so the bottom line is, mate, sorry, done. Sorry, it's been done. End of story. Yeah. And, okay, number 3. Look at this scenario. The hammer falls, but the buyer refuses to sign, gets cold feet. What do you do? And again, Jared, I've had this one. This was a headache that went for a very long time, but it ended up, I had to get interviewed by lawyers acting for one of the parties. But from a legal perspective, what happens there?
Well, it sort of sinks back to the previous comment that it is the auctioneer's final say. If he determines that actually there was a valid bid, sometimes they say, no, I didn't bid. Well, it's the auctioneer's final say on that. But if the bidder does the Harold Holt, if he sort of bolts and says, I'm not signing, then of course what the auctioneer can do and what the auctioneer must do is sign on behalf of the buyer. Because you need to have a valid contract there, so then the lawyers can go and take legal action. If they don't sign it and sort of go, oh shit, and I've seen them before where they haven't bothered to sign it, instead they've chased the underbidder. Very important to chase the underbidder, of course. That's a separate damage mitigation exercise, but you need to get that contract first. Don't go and sign with the underbidder. Get the contract signed and keep the underbidder engaged. Try and sort him out on Monday or Tuesday. But you'll need to have a valid contract in place, which is signed by the auctioneer, as he's able to do under common law, and then you terminate on Monday and sue for damages.
Okay, so even though the buyer is not happy, you sign the contract, you execute the contract, you then sell it to the underbidder on Monday?
No, terminate first. So terminate
Yeah.
the contract. So sign the contract. Give them one last chance on Sunday, Monday. The legal letter
Yeah.
comes through and said, you haven't paid your 10% deposit. That's strictly speaking the act of termination. They haven't paid the 10% deposit. And you've got the underbidder ready to go. As soon as you terminate there, you've got the underbidder ready to sign as well. But you must, it's very, very important. One of the things which is a bit of a contradiction about auctions, Tom, is we've all gone digital. Contracts can be made, on eBay and all that kind of thing. Online, you've got cryptocurrency, but there is still one really solemn principle of English property law, and that is that all transfers must be evidenced in writing. Okay, so that's a bit of a contradiction with auctions, because auctions are all verbal. It's a verbal contract, but it's that final act of the signing the contract, which is something the auctioneer can do as a continuation of the auction. That's what makes that a valid transfer under English property law. But if you don't sign it, then we don't have a contract, because you cannot have a dealing in property in Australia or in England unless it's in writing.
Okay. Jared, sorry to get you. This might stump you, or you can come back to us. A buyer that's in England that can't be at the auction sends their best friend to bid at auction. Can they give them a letter that says, I authorise you to bid on my behalf, and I also authorise you to sign the contract on my behalf if successful?
Yeah, that's fine. That's pretty common practice. Yeah, need to get ID.
Yeah, what's stronger, the auctioneer signing the contract or the representative of the buyer?
I'd probably prefer to get the representative of the buyer. I think I'd still, because you've got their ID, etc. I just would be concerned that the representative of the buyer might think he's off the hook if he hasn't put pen to paper. He might think his representative is off the hook. So I would still prefer him to sit down, go through the routine of signing. But if he doesn't, if he gets cold feet or something, or he says, I don't want to sign because it's not me buying, it's my mate in England, no big deal. Auctioneer signs.
Okay. Brian just asked this question. If you sign the contract on behalf of the buyer, do you exchange without the deposit? This is talking about the previous incident where you're saying the buyer gets cold feet.
Well, you would absolutely. You'd exchange without the deposit, but you've instantly got a termination event, and you would need to give him a day or two. I'm talking till Monday, and then you would need to terminate.
Yeah. By the way, everyone, those of you that have just jumped on, want to let you know, this is Jared from Dott Crossitt that we're talking to about when auctions go wrong. Jared, next scenario. Make the assumption you had an interesting case. In fact, I think you had this case. Oh, mate, I can't believe it. Every one of these that you've done has been, I've had the scenarios. And number 3 and number 4, I'm looking at them here. Number 3 and number 4, the one that I did, Jared, it was a property in the inner west. The buyer paid $4.5 million. At the end of it, claimed that they weren't bidding. And it was ironic because, everyone was shaking hands, congratulating them that they bought it. And I actually remember calling him in and saying, well done. And then they got cold feet and they said something along the lines is, we'll come back in an hour. And then I said, oh, no, we need to sign the contracts now. And they said, we won't sign now. And I said, right. And then the story changed 10 minutes later. We weren't bidding. We were just smiling, right? So the long and short of it, Jared, it dragged on. And unfortunately, the second, the owner of this property had bought elsewhere and had to actually settle on the other property. They ended up, off the top of my head, I mean, the problem that we had here is afterwards the underbidders wouldn't buy it. And that's what happens a lot of the time, because they feel like, hey, I've got carried away because of this buyer. And we had a difference of about $700,000-$800,000 to the next buyer. Anyway,
yep.
Legal action started. 7 months into it, someone had a video of the auction that appeared later, and the video was used as evidence to say it's really clear. You were bidding. Here it is.
Is that young bloke who goes around filming the auctions that I heard about?
I don't think. I think the guy who lived in the street was a student doing real estate.
That's right. Yeah. I remember you telling me that. That's a classic one. But as I think you were just saying there, even though the vendor probably had a remedy, that remedy probably took quite a while to basically resolve itself, because there's legal action, there's chasing them, there's evidence and all that kind of thing. And meanwhile, if they had a pretty straightforward transaction they needed to settle on, well, they wouldn't have the funds. It would have been a nightmare. That's a different question about buying and selling, the risks that present. Everyone thinks it's it's easy and it's done all the time, and it is all done all the time in a nice market. But when the market starts to turn, buying and selling at the same time, I'm talking like settlement wise, it is very risky. And we've got a lot of clients at the moment who are coming undone with that at the moment. Tom, that's reminded me when you was talking there about probably the most famous auctions case. I'll just quickly tell you. I think it's called Phillips and Butler. And what happened was, it was similar but different. The hammer came down. This was in 1907. The hammer came down, and the auctioneer said to the buyer, "Okay, come sign the contract." And he signed the contract, and the vendor signed the contract. And he said, "No, I need your deposit." And he goes, "Oh, my deposit? Really? I'm an idiot. I've got to go back to my house and get my checkbook." So he goes. The auctioneer panics, and it was probably similar to your situation. But it wasn't the buyer who got remorse, it was the vendor. The buyer goes back to his house to get his checkbook, and the vendor's like, "Oh man, I could have got more for this. And if he hasn't got his checkbook with him, what kind of buyer is this?" Right. And so he actually tells the auctioneer, "No, don't wait for him to come back with the deposit. I don't want to sell to him anymore." Anyway, The auctioneer doesn't know what to do. Yeah, the auctioneer, the guy does come back with his checkbook, he pays it, and the auctioneer goes, "I don't know what to do." The vendor says, "Don't exchange it." Right? Anyway, the buyer goes to court in the next couple of weeks, and he demands specific performance. In other words, he demands the contract be honoured. And the court had to consider the question. The contracts were not exchanged; they were explicitly not exchanged. But the hammer did go down, and a contract was signed. So, question for you, Tom: what do you think? What do you reckon the court found? Did the court find that the buyer could get the property, or did the court say no deal?
It's a hard one. I'm going to turn around and say the court found that the buyer had the property.
Correct. It's a very important case because it just shows just how significant the falling of the hammer is. It actually trumps the act of exchange. In and of itself seals the deal. That's exactly right.
Because I think that the key word there is as you got to pay a deposit as soon as practicable as the fall of the hammer, right?
Yeah.
But what you're saying is, man, the hammer goes down, that's it.
Yes.
Right?
Correct. And it wasn't the deposit so much the vendor's argument was all pinned on. The vendor was more saying that he had the final say and say don't exchange. That was kind of it. That there was this sort of secondary act that has to follow the fall of the hammer. And the court said no. He said the fall of the hammer, that's what matters, not what takes place after that. So
okay, so this situation here, and you've had an interesting case about an auction on a commercial property where the property attracted GST, and there was a disagreement after the hammer fell on whether the winning price was ex-GST or including GST. Love to hear about this one.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. So it was a vacant bit of industrial land in Wetherill Park. So that would normally, most residential transactions don't have GST, but industrial properties, particularly if they're vacant, there will be GST on top of it. So what the auctioneer did, it was a very good auctioneer, it may have been Cooley actually. He said very clearly from the start, he said, "I'm going to take bids exclusive of GST." So what that means is, if your opening bid is $1 million, you're going to be paying $1.1 million. But we're going to keep the GST element out of it because that's what we're doing. So he made that very, very clear. I think there was also a video there that established that. Anyway, hammer goes down, and let's just say the price came down at $3 million. Now, they all cracking champagne bottles. They go over the auctioneer's table. They sign the contract that was prepared by the vendor's solicitor during the week. But the vendors, it wasn't me, Tom. The vendor's solicitor was, he wasn't great because he hadn't actually marked what he had marked in the contract actually contradicted what Cooley had said. He actually said whatever price is on the front page is inclusive of GST. So they put down the $3 million. Okay,
Yes.
come on Monday, the solicitor for the buyer and said, "You're great news. Guess what? You've actually just bought that property for $2.7 million." Because they've made a mistake. Now, the vendor took that to court and said, "No, that's a mistake in the contract. What really mattered was what the hammer went down on and what that price was established." So again, going back to you, Tom, from what I said that last case, what do you think? Do you think the court said it's $3 million plus GST or 3.3, or do you think it was $3 million inclusive of GST? In other words, per the contract that was erroneously written.
And as soon as I've hung up from here, I'm going to ring up the agent because I had exactly the same scenario, and it went to court, and I still don't know what the court decided because it wasn't.
Wetherall Park, Sam Properties.
No, it's not. No, this was in the inner west. This was in Burwood. So what happened? So I'm curious. I'm unsure what happened there. Did the hammer matter at the end? Was it the hammer?
It's the hammer. So if the hammer came down at 3.3 or 3 million plus GST, that is a very important, significant legal action. And even though everyone says it's all about contracts subject to the contract, the one thing that trumps that in English property law is the act of the auction, the fall of the hammer. And they actually said, no, it was a very difficult decision. The court, they laboured over it. It was a very long judgment. But they actually said, no, this has been a mistake in the contract. The deal that was struck, and it was meant to be, is $3 million plus GST per the auctioneer's very clear guidance from the start.
Okay, so Jared, that is very, very similar. It was a $4 million property. $400,000 was the amount that was being debated. Again, the contract that was drawn up didn't actually. So the vendor solicitor had done the wrong thing. They should have been clearer in the wording, showing that it was going to be ex-GST. I was briefed by the agent prior, and I clearly remember saying this is ex-GST.
Yep.
Now, what happened is, again, on the Monday, the buyer thought, happy days, I've saved myself 10%. Went to court, and I still remember it. I'm sitting there, and I'm being examined by the solicitor, and the solicitor is asking me questions. You've just brought back memories. The solicitor is asking me questions and says, "Oh, how many auctions do you do per Saturday?" And I said, 10. And would you agree that it is a very hectic period? Yes. And you agree that it was like watching the Johnny Depp case or something, right?
I was thinking, it sounds like Johnny Depp's lawyer.
And would you agree? And would you agree that you're rushing from one property to the other? Yes, that's correct. And could it be possible that when you get to a property that sometimes you sort of have to run through things very quickly? And the answer to that is yes. And then they kept on angling on the fact is, could I have been wrong that I hadn't actually announced it, right? I'm going to ring up. I'm going to ring up at the end of this to see what actually happened with that case. You know, it was really awkward as well, Jared, because the vendor was close friends with the vendor solicitor.
Oh, okay.
You know what I mean? It's a little bit awkward there, right? Now, so by the way, everyone, this just goes to show how important that hammer drop is. Everything you've said so far, you know. Now, can a buyer retract a bid? You're at an auction, and this does happen. So they bid 1 million. 10 seconds go by. Sorry, sir, I want to retract that bid. Can they retract a bid?
You know, before I said that there's shocking little law regarding auctions in New South Wales and in fact, really anywhere. It's just not clear in the statute. It's just not clear. There's nothing in the Property Stock and Business Agents Act that says you can or you can't. There is a very clear section in the Sale of Goods Act. Okay, so nothing to do with property, but obviously to do with auctions. And it does say you can retract a bid. So I'd say the better view from a legal perspective is that you can. And in fact, Tom, you'd confirm, right? It does happen regularly, doesn't it?
It does. Look, it does happen regularly. I had an extreme case in the St. George area about 5 years ago where, Jared, in my view, if they want to retract a bid, I'll retract a bid, right? I'm not going to sit there arguing with them afterwards about whether they're going to sign a contract or not, because we're just opening up even, bigger things. They want to retract the bid, and they retract the bid in a reasonable time frame. But what happened is they retracted the bid, and the underbidder retracted the bid, and then we started going backwards in bids, right? And it was, it's quite scary. You're seeing this free fall of the price, and the vendors stressing out. But then what happened is it went back up because I threatened that I was going to be selling and that we were over the number. And then they realized, they were both poker players, and then they realized, and then we pushed the price up, and it nearly got to the level that it was at. It didn't quite get there, but it got there by around $5,000. So you're saying it's not in the act, but it sort of makes practical sense.
Yeah, it's not in our act, so it's not in the Property Stock and Business Act. It is in the Sale of Goods Act, and I think if it went to court, that they'd probably look at that. But I think you can retract it as long as it's a retraction, as you say, in good faith. I think what you did in your case, I think that makes a lot of sense. Wrestle back control of the auction and actually just call it if it's above the reserve. But yeah, my view is you can retract it.
Okay, now Jared, the last one we're going to talk about, and by the way, everyone, those that are watching, this is Jared, because I know you haven't seen him on my socials before. Jared from Dott Crossitt, a specialist real estate conveyancing firms, New South Wales and Queensland predominantly. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah, we've got a new Gold Coast office that we've opened last month. So yeah, that is right.
So Jared, this happened to me 2 weeks ago. I go to a property at Belfield, and the owner, a bit cagey, says, I'm not giving you a reserve. Just do the auction and come and see me when the bidding stops. Right? And I said to him, well, I need a reserve in writing. I need a reserve in writing. He said to me, listen, when the bidding stops, no matter what price it's at, come and I'll give you instructions. I said to him, I'm not doing the auction because I'm going to be breaking the law. I want a reserve in writing. He then gives me a reserve in writing, which is hugely inflated, right? So basically was still achieving what he wanted, and that was for me to go and see him when the bidding stopped. It was like about $500,000 to $1 million more than it was going to sell for. But I just want to ask you, so firstly, you do need a reserve in writing, correct?
Absolutely. That's very clear. I think I've got it here. Section 15, Property Stock and Agents Regulations. Absolutely, you need it in writing.
Okay. Now, what happens if the vendor has given you a reserve in writing, but the vendor is not at the property? And what happens is they want to amend the reserve because they want to reduce it to what the market is offering so they can sell the property. Do they have to, can they amend it just orally?
No, that they can't. They can't. So, I've seen those reserve letters the auctioneers do, which are nice and neat, and the letterhead and the signatures and all that kind of, that's fantastic. It's in writing, but it doesn't have to be as formal as that. So in writing means in writing. So you can do just a text message. You can do an email, but you can't do it orally. Otherwise, you're going to be in breach of the act. So yeah, look, if they're off site and they can't give it to you, or they can't scribble it down on a piece of paper, just get them to text it to you.
Okay, so just get me, the reserve's $1 million, the bidding stops at 900, the owner agrees to sell, they're in London. Can they send you a text message on the phone to say, I've adjusted my reserve to 900? Because there's no signature on the text message, Jared. Does it matter?
It doesn't say signed. It just says in writing. So that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a golden rule, everyone. When you go inside to your owners and your owners say, and this is going to happen increasingly in this new market that we're in, Okay, reduce the reserve, sell it. While you're there, get them to sign the new amended reserve.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you've got your reserve letter there, probably be better just to whip it out and get them to sign it. But if you don't have it there, just say to them, look, thanks for your instructions. Would you mind just texting it to me? So I've got a record of it.
Yeah. Okay. Absolutely loved this discussion, Jared. Absolutely loved it. We've had some great feedback. We've got good viewers there. They've all stayed on. A lot of people get bored. They're all staying on, watching. So, Jared, we might get you on again every so often on the Real Estate Options Exposed, and just the normal stuff that, we all are faced with dilemmas, and you're spewing because it's not 9 to 5 that, you can ring up the lawyer and you're stuck there. And mate, I know what it's like. I get phone calls from auctioneers myself. Oh, Tommy, please, just 1 minute. This is what's happened, I tell you, the worst call of all I got, Jared, was an auctioneer of mine rang me to tell me that he put the hammer down at under the reserve price.
Oh, no.
Yeah. That's not a good thing, is it?
No, that is not a good thing. Poor bloke.
It was like 100. That's a deal that's done, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, and then the vendor could sue the auctioneer. I assume that would have happened, something like that. Yep.
All righty, Jared. Listen, thank you so much. Anyone that wants to hit up Jared, actually, Susan was kind enough to actually put your details up. I'll bring it up here. That's the best place to get them. Specialist real estate people. Small plug, but Jared, thanks a lot.
No worries. Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me. Yeah, and if anyone has any horror stories they want to run by me, or you've got my details, I'll be more than happy to shoot the breeze with you. I find it all very interesting, and I hope you guys have a great rest of the week. I have
an ongoing nightmare. I get it about once every 6 weeks. Let me tell you what it is.
Go on.
Instead of me passing the property in, I actually, instead of me passing it in, I actually say once, twice, third and final call. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to pass it in. Instead of me doing that, once, twice, third and final call, gone. And then I think to myself, I have this nightmare. I don't know why I've had this nightmare. I have two nightmares, Jared. I'll tell you what they are. That's the first one, and the second one is it's the night before. It's the night before the HSC, and I realise I've done nothing for the whole year. Right? I have this night. All righty, Jared.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. I'll let you go. Thanks, Tom.